Arena shooters were one of the genres that I grew up with, along with stuff like classic RPGs, old school roguelikes, mech games, and real-time strategies, that sort of thing. They were always a sort of permanent fixture on the hard drive. At one point or another, I always had some representative one of those games on the hard drive to play, whether it was UT99 or Star Siege Tribes or Nerf Arena Blast or something of that sort. There was always an arena shooter that I would come home and play. But when I think back and look at my favorites, or the ones that I played the most of, the one that always comes to mind for me is Unreal Tournament 2004. I played way too much of this. I was really excited when we got the family computer upgraded to the point where I could actually play stuff like this, because it was 2004 and there were all sorts of great games that came out that year. And I specifically remember we walked into, I think it was a Sam's Club at the time, and they had this on display, and I actually hadn't heard of it until then because I didn't know there was a new entry yet. And someone was playing it on the computers they had set up, and I was like immediately attracted to it because I recognized Unreal Tournament, so I decided to go over and start playing it myself. And then while my parents were shopping around the store, I was sitting there at the display computers playing Unreal Tournament, and I ended up actually going home with it because I basically suckered my dad into buying it for me. So that's the story of Unreal Tournament 2004, and since then it's been something that I go back to all the time because, well, I remember liking it a lot, and it has aged very well. It's got that classic arena shooter gameplay, but it's also modern enough to be able to work on modern systems pretty well without a whole bunch of extra finicky stuff like some older games like UT99 and the older like Star Siege games and stuff sometimes have some issues running on modern systems and require a lot of extra tweaking. This only requires like the bare minimum of just a couple of extra little fixes that take like no time at all. So it's something that I install like at least once a year and go back to. And this year was no different, but I started to remember a couple of years ago checking out a mod for this game called Ballistic Weapons that I really enjoyed. It changed all the weapon loadouts, it changed several other things, and I just remembered liking it a lot, but I hadn't actually looked at it in several years, so I thought, you know what, since I'm going to go back to this game again, let's actually look at that mod and see if it's been updated, if it's been changed, or if it's even still available, because as anyone who's ever like modded older games knows that sometimes this stuff just kind of disappears off of the internet, unfortunately. It becomes very hard to find. It's like in someone's private Dropbox or something and you can't get access to it anymore. But lo and behold, Ballistic Weapons is not only still available, but it's actually still being actively developed. And this is actually Ballistic Weapons Complete, which is a newer version of the mod that includes all sorts of other stuff that the original version I remember didn't have, because the version that I remember was actually more like a sort of collaboration of several different downloads all in one that you could sort of choose piecemeal, but it got a little bit complicated to actually get all of it sometimes. But Ballistic Weapons Complete, as the name would suggest, is sort of a complete package of all of that stuff in one mod rather than in a whole bunch of separate downloads, all collected and sort of balanced with each other to be a more cohesive, well, complete collection. So, knowing this channel's propensity to go back to older titles and talk about mods and stuff a lot, I realized that I never actually done anything on this game yet, which is sort of a shame, so here we are. This is Unreal Tournament 2004 with Ballistic Weapons Complete. And when I say it's still being actively developed, I do actually mean that. At the time of recording this video, there's actually an update that's coming soon. Despite this game originally coming out in 2004, there are people still making maps, mods, collections, all sorts of stuff for it because it is well loved. And like I said, it's also one of the things from that era that actually works quite well still. 2004 is that kind of cutoff point, really, for PC gaming, where some stuff works pretty well with modern systems and some stuff really doesn't. Because if you look at some other games that came out that year, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, because also in 2004 we had Half-Life 2, which works perfectly still to this day. It's been updated and all that sort of stuff to work with 64-bit systems, and it just works fine. It's as simple as just installing it and pressing play. There's no tweaking that you really have to do to get it to function correctly. But also in 2004, Doom 3 came out, and Doom 3 does not always work well with modern systems. Sometimes you need to mod it a little bit to get it to actually function correctly. Sometimes there are problems with the sound because of that EAX sound engine. There are also some problems with the lighting and shadows on certain graphics cards and stuff, just sort of glitching out and looking terrible. And to the point where there's actually a source port that fixes a lot of those things to try and get the original version working better on modern systems. So it's nice to see games like this that work pretty much fine out of the box with very minimal tweaking. Ballistic Weapons is almost like a total conversion for the game. It's still Unreal Tournament, but pretty much everything about it has changed. It still feels like the classic arena shooter that you may know if you've ever played this game, but with a lot of extra stuff. The entire weapon selection is altered, but the weapons, despite the name of the mod, aren't the only things that have changed. Some of the other more minor changes to start with are things like a dismemberment and gore system, so it's actually even bloodier than it was before, which is sort of fun because, you know, classic arena shooter, they tend to be a bit over the top in that regard, so enhancing that is fun. It also changes the weapon handling and movement physics a bit, but not in a way that makes it less Unreal Tournament-like. It still feels like it should. It also includes some new sounds and a different way that the sounds actually work, which works really well on modern systems. It's quite a nice pack of like higher quality sound assets and things for the new weapons. They even have their own custom animations and stuff, with new reloads and things of that nature being all custom done. And in fact, some weapons even have such detail that the reload animation is actually different depending on if you're reloading a nearly full weapon or an empty weapon. So there's actually quite a lot of variety in the new stuff that it adds besides just the weapons. But of course, the weapons are the main feature of the mod. There are also some new game modes that utilize these new weapons, and some new mutators, so that you can add these weapons and functions into the other game modes that are either part of the vanilla game or other things that you've downloaded separately. There is even a gun game mode in the classic Counter-Strike style, where you start with like some of the most powerful weapons, and then as you get kills you get worse and worse weapons that are harder to use until eventually you finish the match with a knife kill to actually end up. And yeah, it works exactly like you would think, but with more Unreal Tournament-y physics than the kind of traditional Counter-Strike-y physics that you may be used to in a game mode like that. This mod also does change the weapon behaviors a bit and adds some kind of Counter-Strike-like feeling to it a little bit, not to the point where it is just basically Counter-Strike in a different skin, but with a little bit of that feeling, because weapons have more like bloom now and some sort of recoil physics that change how they fire. So if you're sprinting or jumping, the weapons have a lot more bloom and are a lot less accurate, and you need to kind of sit still for a second to get them like laser accurate. But of course, being an arena shooter, you're not encouraged to sit still for very long, so it is minimal. It's not like Counter-Strike where you're supposed to camp around corners all day. You still have a lot of movement happening. And as for the main meat of the mod, as for the new weapons, there are so many, and when you actually use the mutator that adds the new weapons, or you play one of the game modes that has them by default, they do completely replace the vanilla game's weapons. So you can still play with this mod installed with the vanilla game's weapons if you want, but if you actually are using the mutator, then it replaces all of them. You don't mix them in with each other. And the new weapons, there are like around 80 or a little more than that of them, so there are a ton, and they are pretty great. As you would probably expect, a lot of them are projectile based, not hit scan, even if the projectiles move very quickly in some of them, so there is quite a lot of skill to their use, and the weapons have a lot of extra functions in this mod compared to the usual vanilla Unreal Tournament fare, where you usually have a primary fire and an alt fire. In this case, you have a primary fire and alt fire, oftentimes some sort of aiming mode that sometimes changes how it works, and a special weapon function that some weapons have that does something different depending on what you're actually using, and even a mode change that can change stuff like fire modes or ammo types and things like that. So the weapons have a lot of depth to them, and chances are the first couple of times you pick up a new weapon in a match, you won't actually get the full extent of its use yet. You'll have to use it a little bit to actually figure out how it works, which is really nice, because that much depth to each weapon actually adds a lot to the experience. And given that the mod is very much focused on the weaponry, it's nice that it is so detailed and so complex to use. From some more basic stuff like pistols that often have attachments like laser sights or flashlights, which can show where you are to everyone, but can have some other features like increasing their accuracy a little bit, to your traditional like assault rifle type weapons, but even these tend to have some other uses. Like there is the sort of AK-47 looking assault rifle actually can fire knives out if you want, so even the more I guess modern military style weapons still have that Unreal Tournament flair. They're not entirely normal. And there are also lots of other assault rifle type weapons that have some odd alternate uses, like shotguns or incendiary rounds and stuff like that, to add some extra depth to them. And you eventually get to some more exotic weapons, like these staff weapons that are almost like magic and have this sort of charge mechanic where as you get kills with them, they charge up to be able to unleash some sort of big round ending thing later on, to revolvers that have like an over and under dual barrel setup. You can actually fire both barrels at once, which has like ridiculous recoil but is very, very precise, so it deals very high damage, and you can basically like no scope enemies from across the arena with this if you're really good at it, like that. Machine guns with very long reload times but very high fire rates and large magazine capacities, and some of them can actually be mounted as turrets. You have different kinds of sniper rifles, some of which can also be mounted as turrets, but of course that implies that you're sitting still, which you have to be very careful about. They're mostly good for like capture the flag or Onslaught game modes where you might want to set up in like a choke point for a minute and use them. There are also some crazy energy weapons like big plasma throwers, lightning guns, and there's even 2 different types of miniguns, which is a rarity. Usually you only get the one, but in this case you have one that is almost entirely useless to fire from the hip because it has crazy recoil and a very fast fire rate, but its alt fire sets it up as a turret and is very good for basically covering choke points or doing suppression in assault maps or something like that. And when it's set up as a turret, you can even alter its fire rate between 3 different fire rates. Lower fire rates good for like long range suppression, higher fire rates for turning like a narrow corridor into a blender, that sort of idea. And there's another minigun that is more of like the Sci-fi minigun that has like the 3 barrels in like a triangular formation. I love those. Those look so cool. And this one is actually meant to be fired from the hip. It also has a red dot sight if you want to aim down it, although it does slow you down a bit. And it has a slower fire rate that's a lot more controllable. It fires explosive rounds, and its alt fire is actually a gas grenade that does some damage over time if you stay in the gas cloud, but the main use is for it to be ignited and create a big sort of explosive flame on a part of the map for area denial and stuff. And since the main ammo of this gun is explosive, it can set off its own incendiary effect if you want, so that's pretty cool. And since there are so many weapons, you'll probably have some that you really, really like and some that you may or may not like all that much. I don't like some of the machine pistols because they feel a little bit weak and kind of inaccurate, but I really enjoy a lot of these shotguns, rifles, and the crazy weird launcher things that do some very strange things, like the ability to lay these sort of shockwave mines all over the place for area denial and like zoning and Onslaught maps and stuff. Those are pretty cool. So the fact that there's such a huge variety of weapons means that you're going to find some that you really, really enjoy. A lot of them are really satisfying to use. They all have, like I said, custom animations for handling, firing, and reloading them. Some of these reload animations actually change depending on how full or empty the weapon was. Some of them even have multiple reload animations because you have to reload the primary and secondary separately because they use separate ammo. Like this one particular weapon that I really, really like, it's actually one of my favorite ones in the entire mod, that is an energy rifle that you can choose to fire one or both barrels at once for like a big energy blast, and has a sort of missile launcher as its secondary. That is one of those cool missile launchers that fires out like a sort of still missile for a second and then targets where you pointed and then zooms to wherever you pointed at very high velocity. It's really fun to use, although that secondary missile takes a lot of skill to actually hit things with because it has a very small damage radius, but it's quite powerful if you're able to directly hit things. Obviously very good against vehicles, but very satisfying against people as well. The weapons are very much balanced for whatever you want to use them in. They work great for gun game, they work awesome for CTF, for team deathmatch, normal deathmatch. For Onslaught, there are plenty of longer range weapons that work really well in Onslaught and assault modes. There really isn't just a mode that these weapons are meant to be used in. They can be put with mutators into pretty much anything, and they all work well in just about any mode that you can throw at them. So this isn't like a kind of narrow use mod that is only good in like its own game mode or something like that. They're pretty much great in whatever you want to use them in because of how varied and how many of them there are. You're going to find that there's a lot of strategy to apply with these new weapons to pretty much any mode that you want to put them in. I also think that the weapons are pretty balanced in general, and there doesn't seem to be just one that is like extremely dominant. There are obviously some very, very powerful weapons, like this sniper rifle that fires these like explosive rounds with very high precision. There's also like a big incendiary 4-barrel rocket launcher and some other crazy stuff like that, but even the crazier weapons feel pretty balanced because they're rare to find, and they also have some drawbacks like slowing you down or being very inaccurate if you're moving too fast and things like that. So there really isn't like a dominant weapon that everyone always goes for because it's clearly the best one. There's also so many weapons that chances are no one player is going to have the weapon at all times. But of course you can also change which weapons spawn if you want. The mutator has a very long list of configuration options if you want to mess with it, so you can make sure certain weapon spawns are replaced with only certain other weapon spawns, or maybe just take some weapons out of the spawn list altogether if you don't like them or don't want the bots to have them or whatever it is you're doing. And there are also configurations for all the other cool options that the mod comes with, like locational damage. If you want, you know, like headshots or whatever to be worth like way more damage, you can do that. You can tweak exactly how much way more damage is. You can just turn off locational damage if you don't want it and you don't find it to be what you want. And if you're thinking reloading in my Unreal tournament, then you can actually disable reloading if you want. Although a lot of the weapons do reload and that's sort of part of their balance. If you don't want that and you want that more classic or arena shooter feeling where the weapons simply pull from the pool of ammo of that type and don't actually need to reload, you can simply check disable reloading and then all weapons will work that way whether they had to reload originally or not. So that's cool. Pretty much every part of the mod it's very modular. modular. You know, you don't really have to have any one thing that you don't want, so you can very much customize your experience with this mod and only enable the specific things that you actually want to play with, and create like custom mutator lists and change the loadouts. You can even have like loadout based options where you have to get kills to get better weapons, like a purchase system, or where you just choose at the beginning of the match which weapons you want to start with and not actually spawn extra weapons in the map anymore. So there are a ton of different options to actually playing this mod, and given that it can slot very effectively into pretty much any game mode, that means it adds a ton of extra variety and strategy to the game, which was already a very good game in the first place, but with all these really well-made, interesting new weapons, it really takes it to a different level. I would personally highly recommend that you try out this mod if you've never tried it before, and if it's been a while since you've tried it, like it had for me, then check out this newer version, because this whole complete version adds so much extra stuff. It's more well balanced. It's just the sort of defined package that is everything all at once. And since it's being continually updated, that means that it's going to be pretty well balanced, and it's going to have some new features and some bug fixes and things, because it's not old and outdated. And if you want to actually get your hands on this, I'm going to put a couple of links below this video so that you can check it out yourself. If you just search the internet for Ballistic Weapons, then you're probably going to get the outdated version 2.5 download, because that's the main one that's hosted on external sites, and even the original Runestorm site that this mod came from. But that's actually outdated. The thing you're looking for is called Ballistic Weapons Complete, which is everything sort of in one package and updated, and it is only available right now on Discord. So what I'm going to do is link you below to the Steam community guide that actually tells you how to install this, where to get it. It gives you Discord links, it gives you information on all the weapons, it gives you all that stuff, so that if you want to look at it yourself, you can just take a look at this guide in the description and figure out everything you need to know about how to use it. I'm also going to link you in the description to the PC Gaming wiki page for Unreal Tournament 2004, so that you know some of the extra tweaks that you may have to do to get this working on like Windows 10, 64-bit systems. You will need the newest patch, like 3369 in the community editions. If you have the downloadable version, like on Steam or GOG of this game, then that's already installed. But if you don't, if you're like me and you have your old 8-disc installer thing, then you're going to need to do all that manually, but that's all free to find, and it also works as a no CD patch, so that's cool. Once you have that, you can just do a couple of INI tweaks to get it running at a proper resolution, and even though Unreal Tournament actually by default accepts stuff like 1080p as a resolution, you have to manually enter it in the INI to get it to take. And if you do that, sometimes the user interface gets stretched a little bit. The viewport, it just doesn't quite handle that as well as it could. But Ballistic Weapons Complete actually comes with a mutator that is just as simple as activating it, and it will fix those stretching issues. So if you find yourself having those like interface stretching problems because you're running it at a higher resolution, all you gotta do is enable that mutator that comes with the mod, and it's fixed. It's as simple as that. So it's really a pretty easy game to get running, and it's absolutely worth playing this mod because all the extra weapons are just so fun. They're all so cool. And it's a very enjoyable suite of new features and cool stuff to play with, even if you just want to run a couple of bot games to get used to it at first, or if you want to actually like join a server community and play it, you can do either one and get as hardcore into it as you want. So that is a look back at Unreal Tournament 2004 with a bit of the modern touch applied to it with the Ballistic Weapons Complete mod. Definitely go check it out if you're an arena shooter fan. You owe it to yourself to try this out. It is just so fun, and the weapons are so complex, have such depth to them, that it's just one of those things that I go back to all the time. If I'm rendering a video or if I'm waiting for something, I'll just pop this on and play a couple of matches real quick, because it's just that kind of like decompressing experience. It's really nice. So check the links in the description for all the resources that you need. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.